In 2016, a very new park in Poland dropped a metaphorical bombshell on the coaster world. They announced that they would be opening a hypercoaster, but they had two manufacturers to choose from, and they let the public make the decision. There was one version of the coaster made by Intamin, and the other by Vekoma. They featured fairly similar layouts, and it was a bit of a tough choice. At the time, Vekoma had only made a couple coasters recently that were good, so most people still remembered them for their SLCs and boomerangs. So, of course, everyone picked the Intamin. Except me. I vividly remember saying, let's give Vekoma a shot. Once a Vekoma fanboy, always a Vekoma fanboy, I guess. Anyway, the Intamin won. Very soon, though, the layout was changed from the original animation. It looked slightly less impressive, but it did feature a moment of interaction with water, so it wasn't too big of a deal. And then it changed again to what it is today, which has a rather meh-looking middle section, although that does come from someone who has not ridden the coaster. It looks like a great ride, but in my opinion it falls very flat compared to the Vekoma concept. Now that we have seen how great Vekoma is doing in Europe, it does make you wonder if another park will decide to turn to this company for a new hypercoaster. Today, I will be discussing my thoughts on that topic, when I could see it happening, and where it could go. To begin, let's talk about a bit of competition for Vekoma. Obviously, Intamin is a company that parks seem to trust for rides of this style, so they steal a bit of Vekoma's thunder. For example, Intamin built Hyperion and will be building the Mega at Walibi, Belgium in 2021. Another competitor is the most trusted hyper manufacturer, and probably the most trusted manufacturer in general, Balaguer and Mabiard. This company is very well known for their graceful, smooth, and reliable hypers and rides in general. The final competitor that is fairly new to the hyper game is Muck Rides. They have recently become a big player in the hyper market with the introductions of Flash, the coaster with the world's tallest loop, Hypercoaster, a clone of Flash, and DC Rivals, an Australian masterpiece of a coaster that gets rave reviews. Intamin, B&M, and Muck are all very well built up companies, but there is one advantage that Vekoma has on all of them: price. These other manufacturers are extremely expensive to buy from, but you know you're getting an amazing product. We don't have a Vekoma Hyper to use as an example, but looking at the price of Let Coaster at Legendia, which has a height of 131 feet, we can estimate that a Vekoma Hypercoaster would probably be somewhere around $20 million, give or take a couple million. This isn't bad compared to Intamin's 25-ish million, B&M's 26-ish million, and Muck's strange range. I say strange because DC Rivals was only priced at around 19 million American dollars, but Copperhead Strike was almost 30 million. From this, we can assume another Mack Hyper would probably cost anywhere from $20 to $35 million, which I know sounds sketchy, but seriously, Muck's pricing confuses me. Anyway, Vekoma has an advantage over all of their prices and can probably provide a ride experience just as good as them, if not better. However, you have to take capacity into account as well. Shambhala, a B&M Hyper at Port Aventura in Spain, has a capacity of over 1,600 riders per hour. Hyperion has about 1,300, and Flash isn't quite as impressive with a little over 1,000. Meanwhile, Let Coaster falls right on 1,000, and a Vekoma Hyper probably wouldn't get too much higher than that, although they do have longer trains. B&M Hypers are also major crowd pleasers because of their less intense, more smooth and enjoyable ride experiences. The same cannot be said about the very intense looking Vekoma Hyper concept. I do still think a Vekoma Hyper is plausible though, so let's look at what parks I think could receive this style of coaster in the future. First is a rather unlikely pick, Tripsdrill. Let me explain with this one. In 2020, Tripsdrill is receiving a pair of Vekoma coasters with a suspended thrill coaster and family boomerang. If these go over well, I might see them falling right back to Vekoma's knees for more, and I think this is when they could see a Hyper. They have no huge thrill coaster at this point, and their two biggest are the Vekoma Invert and Gerstlauer Infinity Carajo. A Vekoma Hyper would be an excellent standout for the park and would complete their lineup amazingly. The next possible park that I could see with a Vekoma Hyper is, strangely enough, Energylandia. Even though they got Hyperion, I don't think that threw Vekoma off the table. We know that Energylandia loves working with Vekoma, as they have 2 of their thrill coasters and 4 Vekoma family coasters. They also have 3 coasters set to open in 2020, and 2 are Vekoma family coasters, and 1 is a huge thrill coaster from Vekoma called the Shockwave model. Because they have such a good relationship with Vekoma, I could very well see Energylandia turning back to them for another huge coaster. This could be a hyper, or if they wanted to get more unique, they could go for a Giga. The sky is pretty much the limit for Energylandia, as they have a massive pool of money to draw from since they are funded by the government. Finally, for Europe is another very unlikely pick, even more unlikely than Tripsdrill, this being Farup Summerland. Sorry for my pronunciation there, but what can I say? I'm American. Why do I think they could get a Vekoma Hyper? For one, they don't have a true standout coaster at the moment. They also have 2 Vekomas and are currently building a 3rd, showing that they trust the company to some extent. One of their Vekomas was the first of its kind, with their cannon. This tells us that they are open to trying new things, and I think they could possibly be open again in the future with a Hyper. That's about every park I can think of in Europe, but let's move to some other countries. America seems quite unlikely to see a modern Vekoma anytime soon, as S&S is our version, but there are still a few parks that I could picture a Vekoma at. I'm not going to go in depth though, because like I said, I really don't see it happening. The few that I do see having a possibility are California's Great America, who have been rumored to get a hypercoaster for a while and may look for a cheap alternative to a B&M, King's Dominion, who doesn't have a hyper and would do great with one, plus it would be another standout for them, and finally, Dollywood. Dollywood is also rumored to get a hyper, but the more popular idea is B&M, so we'll see who they go with if it happens. Even more parks outside of Europe and America that could get a hyper from Vekoma are Nagashima Spaland, Dreamworld in Australia, and the most likely out of all of these is some completely random park in China. Nagashima Spaland has a Giga but no hyper, so having something to build up with would be great, and a Vekoma hyper would fit wonderfully into their lineup. Dreamworld is a rather strange pick, but the reason I think it has a chance is, well, I really don't have a reason, it just kinda felt right. If the new Blue Fire-ish clone brings in enough guests this and next season, the park may want to invest into something even bigger. And of course, some random park in China. What do I mean by this? Well, think about it. 2 random parks in China are getting major Vekoma models, and I bet the majority of people didn't know these parks existed before that. So yeah, some random Chinese park will probably get a Vekoma hyper at some point before anybody else. Finally for this video is when do I think we could see a hyper from Vekoma get built? This is a very open-ended question as it depends where you look. I'm not going to go over every park again because that would take forever, but I'll go over some general years. Obviously the earliest we could see one of these is 2021, but I doubt we will, unless it's China. My guess is the earliest we may see a Vekoma hyper get announced or built is in 2022. The latest I see it happening is honestly 2030 or so, and I realize that's 10 years away, but I decided to leave myself a bit of room. Even with saying that, I do expect to see a Vekoma hyper to be built sooner. That's about all I have to say for this video. For a quick recap, I think that Vekoma's big competition is B&M. I believe that Tripsdrill, Energylandia, Farup Summerland, California's Great America, King's Dominion, Dollywood, Nagashima Spaland, Dreamworld, and who can forget a random park in China all have the best chances at getting a Vekoma hyper. I think one will be built sometime between 2022 and 2030, but probably before the latter date. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing to help me out by reaching my goal of 700 subscribers by July, and I will see you guys next time.
Sitting in the back, getting heated out my seat. Rolling Thunder Hill, no, nothing can compare to the riding on a wing. You be on the swings, I've been getting thrills. You ain't never seen a coaster. Riding on the voyage, airtime in the forest.